Hi, everybody. Julianna Forlano here with you on actNOW. Today on the program, we're going to be talking about some of the actions that happened in D.C. and across the country, or across the east part of the country. For MLK Day, the Deliver for Voting Rights press conference happened right in D.C., even though the weather was horrendous. That stops nothing. Also in West Virginia, faith leaders, citizen activists, youth took some nonviolent direct action to call on Senator Manchin to fix the filibuster and pass voting rights laws. Do you think shaming is an effective strategy in this case at this period in history? I'm not sure. We'll discuss it as we move further into the show. And then, as promised by the title of the show, the co-opting and corporatization of MLK Day. How many years before the holiday and the Day of Remembrance loses its meaning completely and becomes another excuse for a white sale? Pardon the pun. We're going to be talking about all that and more. Stay tuned. Yesterday was Martin Luther King Day 2022, and people descended on the Capitol asking and demanding their senators and elected representatives deliver for voting rights. The family of Martin Luther King Jr. showed up, made speeches. It was very, very moving, and I have some clips of exactly what went on there for you. And then we're going over to West Virginia, where we're going to talk about a nonviolent direct action that happened at the same time, on the same day, pushing Senator Manchin to fix the filibuster and pass voting rights legislation. Joining me to have this discussion, Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats from ACT TV. Jocelyn, thanks for joining me today.
Hello, Juliana. Yeah,
So,
yesterday was a very interesting MLK Day.
You were completely prepared to be there live, and then the weather did not cooperate. Is
right.
that accurate?
Yes, I think all of us were prepared to go out at 9 a.m. for the peace walk, but I think the organizers still did it, but our coverage was just scaled down. It's been wild weather-wise over the past week.
Yes, it was here too. But also, ACT TV was there, and we're going to show you some of the clips that ACT TV took ourselves when we were there. Well, let's just dive right in. Martin Luther King Jr.'s son, Martin Luther King III, really set the tone with what he was talking about, that we were not here to celebrate. We were here to legislate. That MLK Day is not really a celebration. It is getting back to its radical roots. So here's a clip.
Today, we're not here to celebrate. We're here to be on. We're here to call on President Biden and the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act and to warn that our democracy stands on the brink of serious trouble without these bills. Last week, the president said he's tired of being quiet about voting rights. Well, we're tired of being patient. Since January 6, 2021, when the insurrectionists attacked our Capitol, 19 legislatures have passed 34 laws clawing back voting rights for their citizens. In states like my home state, where new laws, I should say of Georgia, are designed to confuse voters so they don't know where to go. They kick people off the voter rolls so they show up to vote and find out they're not registered. They close polling stations and limit voting hours so working parents and folks without access to transportation can't get there in time. These laws are being passed with knife-like precision to cut black and brown voters out of the process. And they're exactly what the Voting Rights Act once protected against. That's just one state, but it's all over. Texas, Florida, Iowa, Arizona, the list goes on. More legislatures are gearing up to pass laws like these when they convene this year. And our Senate is letting them get away with it because of a little technicality called the filibuster.
Absolutely. And, your thoughts, Jocelyn, after seeing that?
Well, it's something we talked about last time. It's just, I feel like tragic isn't a big enough word because it doesn't really get at the hypocrisy of the fact that we are seeing people tweet about Martin Luther King, Republican legislators who would have conspired in his murder when he was alive.
Yeah, we're going to actually talk about that in the second half of the show, the co-opting of Martin Luther King's message by people who wouldn't recognize the message if it slapped him in the face. What I thought was interesting about what he said was he used the words knife-like precision, meaning, I don't know if he meant this, but it struck me to be like, this is a plan. It's planned because our economy depends on there being very low wage and marginalized people that then white people who are also poor and being abused by our system have someone to look down on and feel better than. And knife-like precision is a very interesting, it suggests that there is, a plan for this. Dr. King, I have some notes here when I was preparing. Dr. King noted that these, I have to put my glasses on to read my own handwriting. That's where we've come to, Jocelyn. So removing the right to vote from Black people, King noted, he said Black Southerners actually laid the groundwork for laws that then further advantage poor people across or disadvantage poor people across racial lines. I just thought that was, that was really interesting when he said knife-like precision. It was like they're doing this on purpose so that they can subjugate not just Black people, but all poor people and workers in this country.
Well, and that's the thing that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was very passionately on top of. It's I think of it as like the anti-poverty organizing era. It wasn't, it's so funny because we talked about this last show. Dr. King is remembered as this peace and love sort of figure, but that's not
like
true
Jesus.
At all.
Same thing. They did the same thing with Jesus. Oh, he's just all peace and love. He was like tossing tables over, making trouble.
And was incredibly critical of class hierarchies, which create race and create racism. Exactly. It would be very simple to be like, oh, we should just all love each other, except that's not, it was really not about any kind of sentimental issue, either surplus or lack thereof. It's about a class system, which allows a very small number of people to have power. And that's still what it's about.
How do we, given what's happened today in our dialogue, in our academic institutions of study, in our Twitter sphere, how do we, it almost seems like you can't really discuss that the issue is not actually race specific, but it's a class issue. You get called like a classist. Bernie Sanders was crucified for, not taking race as seriously as he should have. I'm not saying racism is a massive issue here in our country, but I'm reading and I'm looking into what Dr. King said, and the whole time he was really, he had been talking about the class structure, and class transcends race. How do we do that now? How do we talk about that without getting, destroyed by the lefter than left?
It's interesting, right? Because I think that, it is important to talk about race, right? But it's also important to talk about who race serves and who racism is actually serving. And it's very rarely, something that the disempowered people came up with on their own. We tend to, in this country, think of racists as poor white people, which of course those people are racist. And of course those people,
well, not all of them, but
right. But the ones who are, right. The
Yeah.
ones who are should be absolutely held accountable. But the bigots to be the most afraid of are the ones who profit from the creation of bigotry, who are able to consolidate capital and pit the different marginalized communities against one another. That's always been the case. That's the whole history of colonialism that Dr. King right and spent his life organizing against.
All right, we got off track here. Let's bring it back. I mean, we're totally on track, but I definitely want to bring it back to what happened in the Capitol and let the King family speak in their own words. This is coming up, is the next clip I have is Yolanda Renee King, is MLK's granddaughter. She also talked about how this is not a time to celebrate.
Fighting for voting rights is about fighting for the right to participate in democracy, a movement my grandfather led many decades ago. But it's also about all the other issues that affect all of us: climate justice, reproductive justice, LGBTQIA+ justice, and so much more. We will not stop organizing to get this done. But for all the elected leaders out there who are tweeting, posting, and celebrating my grandfather, Dr. King, today, my message to you is simple. Do not celebrate, legislate.
I mean, awesome. Excellent.
Well, and this is the thing. We are on the verge today. Today was the deadline that Schumer had set for the Senate to get on top of voting rights legislation, and things are just as chaotic as they were to begin with. We're still contending with two rogue Democratic senators, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, to protect voting rights that should have never been repealed to begin with. Everything Dr. King fought for, that we're worse off now than we were then.
Yeah, I mean, these two people, Manchin and Sinema, are basically tools of a capitalist structure. And I think that they're just straight up corporatists. They're beholden to corporations who, as we talked about in the beginning, and as Dr. Martin Luther King and his family have talked about, really benefit from keeping one class subjugated so that another class hates them, keeping the class warfare going on so that people don't see that their interests, especially like the racists, don't see that their interests are exactly the same as the people who they're hating, and they're wasting time hating down instead of hating up, or so they think, hating down instead of hating up. It's just, they're not going to be persuaded, Manchin and Sinema. It's just not going to happen. So what? I don't think there's anything you can do to persuade them without giving them a lot of money, because I think that's what they're in it for.
Well, and that's what's a little bit disturbing. I feel like we're all in this situationship with them where, it's like every new media hit is Biden meets with Manchin/Sinema, and
and they provide cover for the Democrats not doing anything, to be honest. Right. They can say, oh, this is terrible, we're no voting rights, but the Democrats are also, many of them, beholden to corporate interests. Not every single one. There are some that aren't taking that kind of cash or whatever, but most are beholden to corporate interests, and I think Manchin and Sinema just provide them a cover.
Well, and also there's just the very human fact of, I think a lot of Democratic representatives have convinced themselves that they individually are not going to face the wrath of their constituents when their rights are stripped away. As a friend, we were discussing this weekend with a friend who works on the Hill, and he said, everyone thinks the Democrats are going to lose in the midterms, but no one thinks it's going to be their seat. And I think it's a very real thing, because it is crazy making to watch this happen. Like, how are you going to not protect the votes of the people whose votes put you in office? Isn't there a certain amount of self-interest there, you would think?
I don't know. I really think they're all trying to get on that spaceship to Mars because this planet is going down. And so they don't care. They're not playing a long game. I don't know. It's the only explanation, as crazy as it seems, that actually seems like they're not they're not playing a long game, or there has to be something, I don't know, to do something what Dr. Martin Luther King did in the past, and to really be a person of true deep integrity. I don't know if we have room in our elected system for that. We've got Bernie, and still people complain. It's not, there's nobody's perfect, obviously. None of them were perfect, but still, it's just like, it seems with this corporate structure that we're stuck. Yolanda Renee King also spoke a little bit more about, and I have another clip from her speech.
Today in 2022, the right to vote is under attack as our elected leaders try to silence our voices. At just 13, I have fewer voting rights than I did the day that I was born. That's why my family has spent this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend mobilizing, first in Phoenix and now in Washington, to demand the President and Senate get voting rights legislation done. Our rights are on the line. And while I, like many of you, am not old enough to vote, this fight is personal for me. It's our future these elected leaders are deciding. It's our voices they are trying to silence because they know our voices are powerful. They may tell us hundreds of times that we're too young to understand, but those who try to undermine our power do so because they know young people will not stand down in the face of injustice. The Senate must do the right thing when this legislation comes to a vote tomorrow. Senator Sinema, Senator Manchin, our future hinges on your decision, and history will remember what choice you make.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I meant to actually play that one first, and then to roll into the second piece where she talked about the intersection between climate change and voting rights, between LGBTQ rights and the rest, and voting rights and all these other areas, and how voting rights are imperative and at the base level of what's important here, to across the spectrum of issue and advocacy areas. And she made me feel good about the youth caring. That it's like, maybe I feel like I'm getting old and I've been caring for a long time. Like, oh good, the young people care. Thank God, they're more energetic than we are.
Well, and it's that line that she said is haunting, that she has fewer protections on her ballot now than when she was 13 years old, because it's true. In her lifetime, they have repealed the Voting Rights Act. 400 pieces of voter suppression legislation have been introduced in state houses all over this country. And there are just truly unconscionable things happening. Polling places are getting shut down. Mail-in ballots are getting restricted. It's becoming increasingly complicated to cast your ballot, which, as people forget, we tend to talk about the civil rights movement as if like, oh, no one was allowed to vote. No, you legally technically could, but they made it so complicated and stressful and dangerous for Black people to vote that most wouldn't, quite understandably. And now a different but equally sinister version of that is happening right before our eyes.
Nancy Pelosi spoke at the action, and she really made clear one of the arguments that the right is using and right-wing media is using around the filibuster. They always use like it's not the Constitution article, the argument about everything, but clearly they're missing the fact that the filibuster is also not in the Constitution. The filibuster was not mentioned there. So she puts it very clearly. Let's take a listen.
And Republicans must weigh the equities here. While it may be true to them that the filibuster is an important custom, it is not the Constitution of the United States, the truth is. And the truth is that the Constitution says only if you're ratifying a treaty, convicting an impeached person, or ratifying the Constitution, a simple majority. That's why the vice president can break a tie, 50-50. So the truth, we want all of them in the Senate, to weigh the equities. We all want bipartisanship. We all strive for it. We have a responsibility to do so. But when we cannot have it, we cannot confine our democracy to what might be bipartisanly possible. So I ask our colleagues in the Senate, respectfully, for what they think filibuster means, to compare that, to weigh the equities against our democracy, because nothing less is at stake than our democracy. This is about suppressing the vote. It's about nullifying the elections, which Dr. King talked about that day. Nullifying the election. It's about just doing so many things to be obstacles to participation. That's wrong.
Well, she said it.
First of all, obviously there's a lot of criticisms to be made of Nancy Pelosi, but she is a brilliant politician and brilliant legislator. And when she, who is by no means a flaming liberal, comes in and says a simple majority is the most democratic way, it's like, okay, we aren't getting crazy here. It is absolutely bizarre that you need to jump through this many hoops to pass any form of legislation. And it is done to protect the inertia of power. That's why it's like that.
Yes. You said it. Andrea Waters King, also part of the King family, it's the wife of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s son, also spoke at this rally. And I think it's an interesting idea to shame these people who are standing in the way of voting rights legislation. I think it's important, but I also, before just setting it up before we play the clip, I don't think it's enough at this point to just shame, because they have no shame. Shaming them is, useful for those of us who still want justice in the world, but it's not useful against people who are shameless. Here's the clip, and then we'll talk about it.
I ask Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema and all those who stand in the way of restoring voting rights, is that the legacy that you want to leave behind? Many have chosen that path before you, and there are stains on our country's history. After the Civil War ended in 1865, do you know how long it took our country to come together and overcome our disease of division to get it passed? 100 years. 100 years of filibustered civil rights laws. 100 years of Jim Crow. 100 years of poll taxes and impossible tests for black voters. 100 years of being so intimidated at polling places that many felt safer staying at home. If Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema maintain their position, they will extend white supremacy's short chokehold on our democracy and consign themselves to the same foolish legacy. Do they want us to wait another 100 years to have our rights restored? Is that the beloved community of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King? If so, tell it to the grandmother in West Virginia who waits hours to vote, only to find out she's been kicked off the voter polls and it's too late to do anything about it. Tell it to the elderly Native man on a reservation in Arizona who will have to travel 20 miles to vote, even though he doesn't have access to transportation. Tell it to the mother who will wait 10 hours to vote in Atlanta with her children by her side and her bag full of water and snacks because it's illegal to pass out food and water to voters.
Well said, obviously, as have all the speakers been incredibly moving and powerful. But as I was talking about, I just don't think these people have shame. I mean, she talks about the 100-year, not the speakers, obviously, but the people standing in the way of voting rights. She talked about the 100 years that it caused division, but that 100 years was, continuing segregation continued to prop up the ever-growing corporatocracy that we find ourselves in the clutches of right now. In the New Yorker, Jelani Cobb wrote a piece called History Lessons, which I read, and I'm going to quote directly from it because it really makes the point, along with what's being said there in terms of shaming and how that's not going to work. Dr. King said that the racial segregation had begun not simply as an expression of white supremacy, but as a political stratagem employed by the emerging bourbon interests in the South to keep the Southern masses divided and Southern labor the cheapest in the land. The so-called split labor market theory held that by creating a hyper-exploited class of Black people, white elites could hold down the wages of white workers. And so racism didn't just injure Black people, its immediate object. It took a toll on white laborers as well. The fact that this is a political strategy, they're not going to be shamed out of a political strategy. People who vote for them might see them as shameful figures and then perhaps not vote for them. But I don't know if taking it directly to them is going to have any effect, since they are part of this strategy. And I do think just starting to talk about these issues as in there are two parties here, not Republican and Democrat, but basically corporatists and populists. You're one or the other. And if we could just split the country that way, we could, and then people would see what their ideas are standing up for. I think we're in a massive mess because we have two parties who both have sort of populist ideas, one side or another, and they both have a large amount of corporate, they're controlled by corporations and corporate dominance. And if we continue to just say Republicans versus Democrats and Democrats versus Republicans, it's the exact same game as white poor laborers versus Black poor laborers. It's the same game.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you bring that up because it's true. I mean, there are parallels everywhere, with if you depress the wages of one group, then the other group is also insecure. They found that there are a lot of industrial psychology studies about how on a smaller level in a workplace, if one person is getting hazed, everybody else feels the anxiety of that. And I think about that in this way, the entire premise of Dr. King's thinking is that so long as any of us are oppressed, none of us are truly free. And he wasn't saying that in like a peace and love way. He was saying it what you're saying, Juliana. It's just a literal reality that when one group of people are oppressed, that makes everybody more comfortable with oppression, either receiving it or being its actor. And that's a very dangerous situation for a country or society to be in.
I don't pretend to know or be an expert in the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, or neither am I an expert in what is going on in all of, the different areas of thought around this. But I do hope that our conversation has been useful to someone there. I'd be happy to definitely we'll take a look at the comments that are coming in and respond, and possibly even respond on air in a future show. Finally, at the event, Reverend Liz Theo-Harris, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, spoke. And here she is. You can take a listen.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebrated his last birthday, calling for immediate action to address racism, poverty, and militarism, drawing the connection between voting rights and economic justice, building a poor people's campaign. Today, there is no other way to honor Reverend Dr. King than to protect and expand voting rights, abolish the filibuster, raise wages, expand health care, and invest in our children and families. And as Yolanda Renee King said, to take action together. As Ashley said, my name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theo-Harris. I'm the director of the Cairo Center and the co-chair alongside the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival that is organizing poor and low-income people, moral leaders, and activists of every age and race and religion and gender and geography in nearly every state of these yet-to-be United States. As Reverend Dr. King said just months before he was shot down, there is nothing wrong with a traffic law which says that you have to stop for a red light. But when a man is bleeding to death, the ambulance goes through those red lights at top speed. There is a fire raging now for the poor of this society. Disinherited people all over the world are bleeding to death from deep social and economic wounds. They need brigades of ambulance drivers who will have to ignore the red lights of the present system until the emergency is solved. With fewer voting rights today than people had more than 50 years ago, despite people dying for those rights, with a rolling coup taking place in state legislatures across the country, working to diminish the power of a multiracial democracy rising up, with 140 million people who are poor and low income in this, the richest country in the world, and a third of the nation's electorate poor and low income, the nation is in desperate need of ambulance drivers who are prepared to run through the red lights of the present system, to protect voting rights, to abolish the filibuster, to invest in the infrastructure of our democracy and our daily lives.
That's great. I know. I love her. So the movement continues on, and we here at ACT TV hope to bring you information of what's happening in the streets and what's happening in the different movements, and we appreciate you watching our show and being part of our community. Final words for this. Oh, wait. No, wait. Don't leave, Jocelyn and viewers. I wanted to show you what happened at West Virginia at approximately the same time as this was happening, right? So again, I don't think we can only shame. I think we can I think we need to both shame and start talking about this in a different way, because these people have no shame. And you know, a lot of people are starting to understand that it is a corporate structure that is the problem. People who may have been less radicalized, I think, are starting to become aware of that another world is possible, and what are the things that are holding us back from that. Those things, those structural things, are starting to be understood, as far as I can tell, and I'm happy for that. But direct action, always very important. In West Virginia, faith leaders, youth, citizen activists, they took some nonviolent direct action yesterday on MLK Day to call on Joe Manchin to fix the filibuster and pass the voting rights laws. As Senator Manchin had said, when it comes to fixing the broken democracy, he said it himself: inaction is not an option. To do so, the Senate had to pass the Freedom to Vote, John Lewis Act, modeled on Senator Manchin's own bill, the Freedom to Vote Act, by overcoming the obstacle of the filibuster. As MLK and John Lewis wielded the power of good trouble, nonviolent direct action, to advance the cause of voting rights against great odds, civil rights and democracy advocates are doing it right now. They're taking it up to dramatize the urgency of the issue and to move the conscience of Senator Manchin. I say he doesn't have a conscience. He's bought out. So we can move him by getting press coverage of your good actions there. So I'm not sure if shaming him to stand on the right side of history is something that he cares about. He certainly doesn't seem to care about it that much. But the voters of West Virginia may care about what their votes mean and where they stood as history comes down. Here is a speaker from West Virginia during the day of the arrest, and then I'll show you some of the actual arrests. Uh-oh. We got a pause in the video system. I can see Giancarlo in the background poking to find the one. That's okay. We can move on, right? And then should we come back? Do we have trouble?
Come back, right?
We might have trouble. Did you follow this?
I did. So I was doing back end production stuff for this one, and it was a really interesting action. These were West Virginia activists who were getting arrested, calling upon Joe Manchin to serve his constituents and not his corporate donors.
Yeah. Yes. I see something popping in here. Give me a thumbs up if you're with me, Giancarlo. And if not, it's okay. You are? You're the best. The man fixes everything from behind the scenes. He's our producer. All right, here is, let's go with the speaker first before the arrest, Giancarlo.
50-something years removed from the assassination of Martin Luther King, that we're still talking about voting rights. It's a problem, and it is an indictment of the problem that's still in this country, that people who they want to keep the power from, they'll go any measures whatsoever to keep our rights from us. We found that out this time last year, January 6th. That's right. When January 6th came around this year, they conveniently forgot. I saw nobody talking about it. There was no action to remember. But we understand that when the powers that be lose, they take it out on us. So immediately after Donald Trump lost a fair election, 30-something states put in legislation to make it harder for us to vote. That is in your face, that we will do whatever it takes to keep y'all from voting so we can stay in power. And so we already know it's more than politics over people. And so it's a shame that people have to leave the safety of their homes to come and talk to one man who's got people in his own state living in squalor, and he refuses to do the right thing. And so, I mean, he can do whatever he wants to do, but I'm at the point now where I just think he needs to be voted out. I mean, do what he wants to do, because he's a rich man, does not care about regular people standing in the street. He can be in his mansion. He's got the right last name. He can go on his yacht. And whatever we do out here may or may not change his mind. But the next voting cycle, we need to make sure we keep the same energy and get his ass out of office.
Well said. Jocelyn, do you see, I know you're covering this. Those are the people getting arrested. Well, we'll go to that, and then I'll ask you my question. So you can play it, Giancarlo. As you can see, folks are getting arrested in the freezing cold West Virginia snow, trying to bring a message to Joe Manchin that we need to remove the filibuster in order to have a just democracy.
As you saw, there were folks being arrested. There were folks that was arrested for protesting today to end the filibuster for actions directed towards Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin, and that was it. Again, you all take care.
A man after my own heart with the Pittsburgh Steelers hat on. I think it just bears pointing out how risky it is to actually be arrested. You will have an arrest record. It could, we've had Heidi Seek on this program. She's been arrested for demonstrating to protect a woman's right to bodily autonomy. And she talks about having the privilege to not be so worried about being arrested because she has the job that she has, where they understand what she's doing. Having an arrest record as a middle-aged white woman may not cost you as much as having an arrest record as a person of color in this country. So these things, it's not just like, oh, they're getting arrested and then they'll go home and what difference does it make? No, they really are putting their whole being on the line. And so it is very important what they're doing, and very, we can have gratitude. We can have gratitude.
I agree with you completely. And it's also, an interesting point to remember, as obvious as it sounds, that civil disobedience was the number one tool in Dr. King's toolkit, which feels so typical of the time for us. But I'm reading a book right now that I recommend to everyone, The Sword and the Shield, about Dr. King and Malcolm X and their different theories of organizing. And it's like, no, the way Dr. King rolled out civil disobedience was very unique in this country. And to do that on the day that is meant to honor him, it feels important and spiritual and unfortunate also, because again, this should be a day of celebration.
Actually, we have some, in his own words, we have some video of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'm going to throw Giancarlo way off because we had them in order, but now that we're talking about nonviolent direct action, JC, can you play the in his own words, Dr. Martin Luther King on nonviolent direct action?
Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but that is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so must we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. I therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in monologue rather than dialogue.
Well said, obviously. You know what? I have other clips from MLK so that he can say it in his own words. And for me, I just love revisiting his work and his legacy. But I'm going to save them for segment 2 because they all fit in there, because we're talking about capitalism and his stances against that. Isn't it interesting that he wasn't so much for capitalism? Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats, thanks for being on the show with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely, Juliana.
As always, follow Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats on the Twitters. It's her Twitter account. You're just Jocelyn MK, right? On the Twitters?
Yes. Bye, guys.
All right. We'll see you later. Thanks for joining me. And we'll be right back with our segment on the corporatization and co-optation of MLK Day. All right. So we've been talking about Martin Luther King Day. The Martin Luther King holiday just ended yesterday. And I've been noticing that not only has the right co-opted Dr. Martin Luther King's quotes and message and twisted it in some bizarre universe in which they live to support their libertarian right-wing fascist agenda, just like they did with Jesus. The powers of corporatism are also, the corporations themselves are also taking on Dr. King's message. A couple of years ago, during the Super Bowl, Dodge, there was an ad for Dodge, the cars. It got a lot of criticism, and it used a sermon by MLK to sell trucks, which of course, that's what he was always talking about. The arc of justice bends toward Dodge Rams. Anyway, the ad featured a section of King's speech, the drum major instinct sermon that he delivered on February 4th in 1968. And it was put over these patriotic American images, military stuff, and also images of service jobs like teachers and firefighters. I have the ad. Let's take a look. Get ready for horror.
If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. By giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know the theory of relativity to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics in physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace. Soul generated by love.
Damn, those Madison Avenue bastards really know how to make a commercial to sell you something. Clearly, the Dodge Ram is not, they're not pointing at their major consumer base is the working class. And I mean, using a speech by Martin Luther King to sell a truck, I just can't even. But somebody overlaid that ad, the same exact ad, with what King actually said about capitalism and car commercials. So here it is. This is a good time.
The presence of this instinct explains why we are so often taken by advertisers. You know, those gentlemen of massive verbal persuasion. And they have a way of saying things to you that kind of gets you in the bind. In order to be a man of distinction, you must drink this whiskey. In order to make your neighbors envious, you must drive this type of car. In order to be lovely to love, you must wear this kind of lipstick or this kind of perfume. And you know, before you know it, you're just buying that stuff. And I've got to drive this car because it's something about this car that makes my car a little better than my neighbor's car. And I am sad to say that the nation in which we live is the supreme culprit. And I'm going to continue to say it to America.
Am I right? Is that not great? Well, this year we saw the same thing. We saw ads co-opting the message. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is I think I have an image from the slideshow, John Carlo, that we pulled off of just like the net. There's a lot, 17 best MLK Day weekend sales for 2021. These stores are having Martin Luther King Jr. Day sales. Isn't that interesting? I mean, okay, so the weekend is the first 3-day weekend holiday of the year. And retailers tend to throw sales on 3-day weekends because shopping. Yeah, but MLK weekend, I mean, it's not known in retail as a major shopping event compared to other long weekends like Memorial Day or Labor Day. And I just wanted to point, and I pulled that right out of this article, that it's not known as a major shopping event compared to other long weekends such as Labor Day, Memorial Day. Let's just unpack that for a minute. Memorial Day is just a major shopping event now. That's what it is. You get a day off. Occasionally there's a parade and a wreath laying, and then you move on to shopping. It's the same with Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is like gluttonous eating and then shopping and shopping and shopping. And, MLK weekend is Labor Day. Labor Day is about fighting for the rights of workers. It's not just a day off that caps the one end of the summer. It's been cheapened and destroyed and disgustingly pasted over by shopping, which is all you're supposed to do after 9/11 happens, and all you're supposed to do in order to celebrate the birth of Christ or whatever, it's pretty soon. MLK Day weekend will be another shopping weekend, unless we can keep the spirit alive, as these folks were doing that we just, that we just saw. I also saw some right-wing co-optation of Dr. King's message that I'd like to bring to you today. The right wing talks on Fox News and some of these other crazy towns. They talk about how King would have loved their share, their love of capitalism. Okay, so this is not accurate. Okay, this is what King said about capitalism, and I quote, "Something is wrong with capitalism. Maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. We must develop programs that will drive the nation to the realization of the need for a guaranteed annual income for all," which is when's the last time you heard on Fox them quoting MLK with what is actually said, other than the one quote that they use over and over? Giancarlo, let's play the MLK in his own words segment. The first one, it's the Beyond Vietnam, but not the greatest purveyor of violence one. It was the one before that.
Compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say, "This is not just." It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry of South America and say, "This is not just." The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war, "This way of settling differences is not just." This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
Oh, gosh. Leonard Pitts Jr. of the Detroit Free Press put out a piece today that I think everyone should go Google and take a look. The title is "Conservatives Attempt to Co-op MLK Fall Flat," where he outlines exactly how the conservatives think, and the opposite of what MLK is the opposite of what MLK thinks. He did that quote about something is wrong with capitalism. He also talks about how MLK would probably not be in line with condemning reparations and affirmative action. And then the quote he gives from MLK is a society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for him in order to equip him to compete on a just and equal basis. And, the Fox News, they're always out there talking about how MLK would be on their side. And the viewers and the network itself does not believe in white privilege. MLK says whites, it must be frankly said, are not putting a mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that white people of America believe they have so little to learn. Pitts also points out that unlike the right wingers, MLK definitely would oppose the filibuster, would be happy to end it. His quote, "I think the tragedy is we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting." We are living through the same spiritual and same historical times that Dr. King lived through. And I hope that we can put up the same kind of fight as a group, as a nation, that the people of his time were able to do. I'm Julianna Forlano. Coming up on Thursday, we've got Ben Burgess on the program. He's going to do the headlines with me. And then John Nichols is coming on to talk about the importance of those progressive candidates that I've been showcasing here on the program. I hope you enjoyed our coverage of the MLK rallies and some of what's happening around the corporatization of MLK Day and weekend and making it into a big shopping holiday. They're looking forward to it. I am not. I'll see you on Thursday. You're watching ACT TV.